How do you cultivate an entrepreneurial mindset? If you're looking to launch and grow a successful startup, this episode of the Zista Podcast is for you. Welcome to the Zista Podcast, where we invite industry speakers and academicians to answer questions that students have within a specific subject area. Today, we're focusing on entrepreneurship, and joining me is Tanul Mishra, CEO at Afthonia Labs. Tanul has worked with leading brands like Inox, Tata Communications, Reliance Communications, and Paymate. She went on to found Eatalish, a food service that brings artisan food makers across India directly into the houses of customers. After a successful entrepreneurial journey, she felt that she wanted to contribute to the startup community, and she founded Afthonia Lab. Now, Afthonia is an incubator that creates an ecosystem for fintech entrepreneurs to thrive and sponsor. They've worked with startups like Ginger, Root Code Factory, FlashPay, Tickmark, DigiSubida, and Phone Per Loan, just to name a few. Thank you, Tanul, for joining us on the podcast. We're delighted to have you here today.
Thanks for having me over.
Awesome. I wanted to ask you, Tanul, how can budding entrepreneurs validate their ideas? They're looking for the right product market fit. So how do they go about doing that for their respective ventures?
So, again, it's not a one size fits all answer, but I'm going to try and sort of break this down. So there are some products that you can actually directly take to the market, So say, for example, if you're in the food business, it might be easier for you to sort of do sampling with friends, families, try and reach out to modern trade outlets or your local kirana stores and do it. But if you are in a more complex business, say, for example, if it's a fintech or a space tech, which is compliance heavy, regulatory heavy, in which case I would definitely recommend becoming a part of either an incubator or an accelerator. India has lots of incubators and accelerators, both government, educational, institute-led, corporate-led. What this does is gives you an access to a knowledge bank with the different set of mentors. It gives you an access to connects. So, Amit, you and I both know that when you're launching a product and you go to a corporate or any business and say, hey, take this solution, they're actually going to be putting their credibility on the line. And which is why they look for solutions that have already been tried and tested. So when you have somebody like an incubator, accelerator, being a bridge, your solution automatically carries a lot more credibility and opens more doors. So I would definitely say become a part of incubators, accelerators. There are a lot of startup communities out there. So, you've got Startup Grind, you've got Head Start, leverage that ecosystem because the more people you meet, the better network you have, and network is net worth. So.
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, no matter what your product or service, it's about people, the connections that you build. And even when you're executing on your vision, you need to work with a good, talented team. So again,
Absolutely.
It comes down to people. I noticed that, in the course of your conversation, you talked about incubators and accelerators. And
That's right.
For the sake of students, I hope you can take maybe a minute to tell us more about the difference between the two.
Okay, so it's literally like going from nursery to higher classes. Incubators come very early in the life of a startup. So some incubators like ours actually come in very, very early, sometimes even at concept stage. So they actually help you build the product out in some cases. If you have an early product, they help you build early scale. But accelerators come in like at the second stage. So when you've got a product and some skill, they actually come in to help you accelerate and take you to the next level of business.
And
so that's really the difference.
Sure. In the startup ecosystem, would you say there are more incubators or are there more accelerators?
I think because the line is very thin, at least in India, and India is very, very nascent, most people tend to use the terms interchangeably.
Okay.
So to give you an idea, for example, if you look at the number of startups, it's China, US, China, India, these three large countries. But when you look at the number of accelerators, US or incubators, US has 2,500 plus, China has 1,500 plus, India has 500.
Wow, that is disparity there.
Yeah, that's a huge disparity that you're talking about. So I would say it's a mix, but a lot more incubators that you see than accelerators. And a lot of these incubators are actually based out of educational institutes and government-led incubators. there are very few private and independent incubators like us.
Right, right. And I'm glad, I was on your website. I was seeing some of the great work that Afthonia Lab is doing. And, we maybe come to that a little later in this discussion.
Obviously.
I wanted to ask you, Tanul, now as a student or as a young entrepreneur, you're working on a pitch deck. But how do
Right.
you tailor that pitch deck to different types of investors and audiences?
Okay, so I'm gonna sort of just take this a little, a little deeper. And
Sure.
when you sort of building a deck out, right? The first thing that you need to know is know your audience. Who are you going to, right? So there is investors. The pitch for an investor is very different from a pitch for a customer, and will be very different from a pitch to a partner. And
Right.
even within investors, the pitch of somebody who's coming in at a pre-seed stage will be very different from a pitch for somebody who's coming in at a pre-series A stage, because the value propositions that these guys look at these different segments are different. So I think some points that we ask our startups to focus on, is one is, of course, the key is to maintain a balance between a consistent messaging of what you're really selling and what you're building, and the value propositions that you have across the different segments, like a investor, with stage, customer, as well as, partner. The other important thing is to keep it interesting, because all of us see many, many, many conversations, even if you go pitch to a business partner. I mean, I've done sales, you've done sales, how many sales pitches land up on everybody's table, right? So you've got to keep it interesting to get that thing. But some key points that I'd like to sort of emphasize on is have a one line which clearly states what you're building, right?
Right.
What is your solution about? The market size, right? And why is it such a big problem? You need to articulate that really clearly. What is the problem that you're solving? Why does it make it so critical for whether the investor is putting in the money, or why is it so critical for the customer who's taking it, right? Articulate the solution and why your solution is the best solution for this and not somebody else's solution. Obviously, if it's an investor pitch, you want to talk about the revenue model, because you want to tell them how you're going to make money. And the most important thing, especially when you're coming in at an early stage, is talk about the team. Because anybody, even if it's a customer or an investor, they're really backing the team at an early stage.
Right.
And they need to know why you are the right team for this and what makes you so super special in this segment. So really, these are the 4 or 5 things that I would say, honestly, that, somebody pitching in the early stages needs to focus on.
Good points, all. I think you distilled it really well. And one thing that I really liked was, being able to summarize what you're doing in a single line. The minute you need to keep rambling on, it means perhaps you yourself are not very clear.
Absolutely.
But if you're able to distill that and say, this is what I'm trying to achieve, this is my TAM or my target addressable market, and this is how my solution meets that need, how clearly you can articulate that can really make for a winning proposition. But thanks for that, Tamil. It was really, really some good points. I wanted to ask you as we move along, about some of the common pitfalls that entrepreneurs should avoid when they're presenting their pitch deck. In the course of your work, you must have encountered a lot of entrepreneurs. So can you give us some examples of, not specific examples, but use what they did as an example as to what went right versus what did not go right?
I think, there's one thing that it's a guilt, but I really want to state it, that all of us have shortened our attention span in the last number of years, right? And that's on us. But, for an entrepreneur, it just means that they have about 5 or 7 minutes to really get you interested in what they're doing. And sometimes what entrepreneurs do is, really save the best for last rather than putting it out there. So, for example, there was somebody who was presenting at like a pitchathon, and they put the value proposition forward. And the first thought that all of us had was, will this work? Will you have customers? And we kept throwing questions. But by the time they reached the last deck, they already had a sizable set of customers. Okay. Now, what you really want to do is, if you already sold the product and you have, a use case that people are paying for your product, that should really go out there first, right? So, that's first thing. The other, some few things. One is really make it interesting so that you can capture the attention, get the important points out first. The other thing that I have seen is most of them are, know the competition at a broad level.
Right.
But they're really not do not have an in-depth understanding of what the competition is doing. The really good guys will know what their competition is doing because they know how they're better, or they know what they need to do to make themselves better, right? Uh, the other thing is having a kick-ass demo. That is so critical because what you see is what you believe, right? And I think that the one thing that I would tell all founders, the biggest pitfall is storytelling, right? You have to be able to tell a story. That is so different from actually getting somebody to just sell what you're building, because each of us are investing in somebody's story and somebody's vision. And if you want me to put money into you, then you've got to be able to sort of get me vested in your journey, your emotion, your passion. So that storytelling is something that I see missing in a lot of founders, and that's something that I can't stress enough on.
Awesome. I really like the inputs you shared, Tanul, and I'm sure you've had a lot of experience in this space. So what you're telling us and what students are going to be listening to is going to be pure gold for them. So thanks for that. Uh, I wanted to ask you a few more questions, if that's okay. How do young entrepreneurs deal with competition, regulations, and customer feedback? So let's say you've got a prototype, let's say you've got something which is
Right.
almost ready, and you get
Right.
feedback, or you have to take care of regulations. Do you see entrepreneurs actually adapting their strategy or their business model as they move along their journey?
So a lot of founders actually adapt and pivot. A lot of founders keep their ear to the ground. So a lot of the founders, uh, are already sort of hearing murmurs that there's a change of compliance which is going to happen, because you start seeing tinges of these in articles which come out, discussions which happen. So you start preparing for that. So a lot of good founders actually are preparing during the course of this journey for any founder. And I, before running Afthonia, I was running Eatlish. And, every time we would take this product to, say a modern trade outlet, everybody would have a feedback on the branding or packaging, right? And as a founder, it is not so easy to take feedback personally because you're so vested, but you've got to stay objective. And the good guys will sort of try and set it aside and look at the feedback objectively and say, hey, is there merit? Yes, no. And if there's merit, how do I leverage it? Because as a founder, you always keep company first, person second.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And, to be honest, that's not an easy question to answer because depending upon the nature of the product or service, I'm assuming that in some cases you can adapt, and perhaps in some cases the core concept itself is so immutable that the adaptations are more, peripheral rather than, really
Yes.
adapting the core, right? So
Absolutely.
there's no one
And
right answer for
yes,
this.
there is one right answer. And a lot of times, when you're an early stage founder, everybody has an opinion.
Yeah.
So you've just got to, stay focused. And like I said, try and sift out the relevance from the non-relevance, and, because you don't want to miss out on the gold feedback just in case.
Absolutely. And being objective helps. So that point that you said about being objective, I think that's one trait that entrepreneurs really need,
Yeah.
Okay. So talking about traits, I was actually coming to my next question,
Right.
As a founder, I may be looking for a co-founder. And
Right.
therefore, if I'm on that journey, when I'm searching for a co-founder, what traits or what characteristics should I look for?
Okay, that's a really hard one, because I always say that a co-founder is going to be even more important than your spouse, because you're going to end up spending more time with your co-founder than you would spend with your spouse. Like, really. So I think it's very important to have so one is never look for similar skill sets, right? Because it's so co-founders usually come together, because you would have either worked together or you're friends or something. But if you really need to look for a co-founder because you have an idea and you just want to get a partner on board, and it's always good to have a co-founder, because you get somebody to share the journey, have a sounding board. You need somebody who does not have the same skill sets as you, because you need a different perspective. So, for example, when I was running Eatlish, my forte has been revenue and sales and business. But Chipra's forte was product. So you need somebody who can sort of come in with that. So a lot of times you'll see business founders with tech founders. because the other one can take care if you're a technology heavy solution. The other and most important thing is you don't want a yes person in a co-founder.
Mm-hmm.
You want somebody who has the ability to challenge a decision, ask the right questions, prod why you're taking a particular point. Somebody who will help you keep the interest of the company above both your interests, right? Because they're really your partners in the journey. And when you take a decision, it impacts the employees, it impacts the business, the growth of the business, and you want somebody who can actually challenge that if it needs to be challenged. And most importantly, like I said, two people who respect each other. Because only when you respect each other will you be able to take even the unpalatable feedback.
Makes sense.
Someone you can sort of share things with. So I always like to give this example. If you have two co-founders, you put them in two separate rooms and ask them a question which is fundamental to the growth of the company, and the value behind that answer should be similar.
Right. They may kind of voice it a little differently, but at the essence, the core of that answer is similar.
That answer should be similar.
All right. That's a really interesting observation there. I wanted to kind of ask you one more question, Tanul. I'm sure in our audience, there are a lot of budding entrepreneurs. There are a lot of future entrepreneurs waiting to kind of perhaps stumble upon a good business idea, but they know they want to do something on their own. Right. So I wanted to ask you, what would be your advice to them if they want to be successful? How do they cultivate an entrepreneurial mindset, personally and professionally?
So an entrepreneurial mindset is about ownership. You own it. You own every piece of it, right? The success, the failure, everything. You need to be very solution oriented, because when you start off, you're not going to have the resources that a large company has. So you're always going to hit roadblocks. You're always going to have to take decisions between urgent, important, and critical. And this would mean you need to be sort of very solution oriented. But the three things or four things that I think we don't often speak about is you need to be flexible, because you're going to have to change course a lot of times in your journey. Open to feedback. Okay. And most importantly, you need to have a childlike curiosity. If you don't have that childlike curiosity, you're going to stop innovating. You're going to stop thinking. And resilience. It's a tough journey. So you just need to be resilient to see it through.
I've heard that from so many entrepreneurs, that, but I guess the true aspect of that is when you're actually doing it, because it's so different working in a 9-to-5 kind of environment where you have certain objectives that you're working towards, which is of course similar to what you're doing as an entrepreneur. But in the case of an entrepreneur, it's sort of make or break. So the level of stress and the level of I would say work pressures would be far more, and I can totally
and I think it's a lot of
relate to that.
At least beginning to build out, right? There is a lot of unpredictability, a lot of ambiguousness that you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And you come to work every single day, and it's like chipping away at a mountain, till you can actually form that tunnel and get through it, right? So it's an everyday process. It's not like you see magic happening every day. So that's why the resilience is so important.
Awesome. That's been really nice hearing from you, Tanul. And before, say, we bring this to a wrap, I'd like to ask you a little bit about, Afthonia. And, in the course of Afthonia, what you've done is you've really created a fantastic environment where fintech startups can, shine. And I wanted to ask you, what attracted you to kind of focus on fintech startups? And one more question here is, from the different startups that you've incubated, is there someone which is perhaps closer to your heart for any reason?
Okay, so I'll take the second one first. I'm not supposed to have favorites, so I don't have any favorites. But there are a couple of very interesting solutions that I sort of, feel very passionately about because of different, sort of relevance. And say, for example, one of the solutions which I really like is the startup called as FundGrow. When the founder came to me, she said, we teach our kids how to save money. We don't teach our kids how to grow money. So the platform is aimed at actually building a platform for teenagers to figure out how to earn money and that grow money. So they have a teen Lancer program. So you have corporates on one side and you have teens on one side. And you've got corporates who give projects to teens, and the teens, when they finish this project, so it could be like making a, creative, it could be doing a presentation, they get paid for this. And the teens can then utilize this money on the platform by investing or growing. So just that whole value of money that comes into the system and preparing the next generation sort of appealed really to me. The other one is by a really young founder, and it's called as Legacy Next. Now, it's a very relevant solution, although it sounds a little morbid. But it focuses on the fact that, a lot of us today are financially, secure, and we put things in. But what happens to this when we die, right? The whole claim process for a family is extremely traumatic. And I was stunned to know that if you do not leave a will behind, it can take anything from 8 years to 12 years for your family to get access to these assets.
Right. I
And that's
remember
insane.
talking to you about this, and,
Yeah.
it's such an interesting solution that this person is working on. Yeah.
Right. So I think so they've sort of worked on this, and it's called Legacy Next, where you can actually, they have families. So they do two bits of it. One is when you are alive, you can go ahead and put all your financial assets on this platform and tell them how you want it distributed and what happens. They also do will creation. And in a lot of cases, they've, had to actually go ahead and do the claim process, and help get that funds to the family at least at the
Sure.
time.
Sure.
So I think these are two solutions which I think, while they're addressing two very different spectrums, are just interesting from the perspective in terms of how one is so future-oriented for the next generation and how this one is future-oriented in a completely different way. So that spectrum is extremely interesting.
But yes, I'd agree with you. Both of them are very interesting solutions, very unique also, you could say.
Right.
Yeah.
How did I start Afthonia? So, I was in a corporate job before this.
Right.
And then I worked for Paymate for quite a bit of time. That was my first brush with fintech, where I focused, and those were the cool days of SMS and IVR. There was no 4G, 3G. So everything that we did in fintech was using SMS and IVR for authentication purposes to get transactions through. So I worked on a couple of interesting projects in financial inclusion space, money transfer, prepaid, etc. But then the entrepreneurial bug sort of overtook, and I set up Eatlish. When I co-founded Eatlish with Shipra, we realized that we were both, professionals with experience, and we could leverage our network. But there was a lot of entrepreneurs out there who had no access to this, especially, the first-time entrepreneurs.
Sure.
No access to network, knowledge. How do you go about it? No safe space to experiment and fail even in smaller strategies, right? So when I had an exit from Eatlish around 2018, the question was, what do I do next? And that's when I wanted to continue in the startup ecosystem and sort of figure out a way to sort of contribute and build that out. And which is where the thought of an incubator came in. And like I stated earlier in the conversation, that was what got me really excited that there is a gap, but
Right.
there is also need, because we have so many founders coming in every day, and you want to really build out an ecosystem which reduces failure, which at least gives everybody a fair chance and a safe space to sort of play and grow with. Fintech, because when you combine finance and technology, the growth is huge, but so are the repercussions, and it is a complex sector. There are compliances, but you're also dealing with the Indian diaspora, which is so different, right? The urban population is so different from the tier 3 population, which is so different from your population in the villages. And the solutions that will cut across the spectrum will be common, but also different to a large extent, right? So this is where we felt the actual sort of incubation process will be relevant and needed. And that's why the focus on fintech.
Makes sense. I can totally relate to what you're saying. And I think what you're doing as an incubator is really helping a lot of people, bring their products and solutions to life. And in that sense, it's very noble. I really like what you've been doing. And I also want to say thank you so much for, talking us through such important elements. I've really enjoyed this discussion, learned so much, and, enjoyed interacting with you, Tanul.
Thank you for having me. It's always good to be here.
Wow, that was an amazing session. Tanul really shared some good insights in terms of what does it take to succeed as an entrepreneur? How do you find the right co-founder? How do you work on that pitch deck? and keep perfecting the product market fit. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, subscribe to our channel on YouTube to get more content like this. You can also follow us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Our handle is the Zista Podcast. Till we meet again, we'd say, stay curious.